Hey everyone, Kyle Lewis here from the Worship Keyboard Tutorial YouTube channel, giving you tips and tricks to help you with your worship keyboard ministry. This video is a follow-up to the arrangement of Come Thou Fount that I gave you in the previous video. Now, if you haven't checked it out yet, you can click this link up here to see the video. I'll also put a link to it at the end of this video. Now, full disclosure, this is a more advanced video, and there's a lot of components to it. So if you're a beginner or intermediate player, don't get bogged down by all of the terminology and don't feel like you have to get everything from this lesson. This is to just kind of throw everything at you that I was working on with the arrangement, but with the idea that maybe you could take one or two things to assimilate and work into your own playing and into your own arrangements. But if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell to be aware of future videos. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. All right, if you're ready, let's get started. So there is a PDF of both this lesson and the arrangement with the markers in it. So as I'm calling out each of the markers like A, B, C, you can refer to the arrangement and to the lesson. So this first one is tone clusters. Now, tone clusters are just kind of as the name applies. They're a cluster of tones or a cluster of notes. We're not going to go into all the history. I put some of the nerd nuggets in there. If you're really into music history or music theory, you can read some of those. But for the sake of the video, I'm just going to simplify some things to just give you the basic concept. So a tone cluster, as I said, are just a cluster of tones. Here I'm using this B, C, D as this tonal cluster. And tone clusters tend to give you a little bit more ambiguous sound. If I was to play a regular C chord, that sounds like a C chord. I'm in major key, and that gives me my tonal center. If I'm playing a chord like this, that's a little more ambiguous. And I'm purposefully using this chord to set up the arrangement. So we're starting a little bit more ambiguous, and we're going to build into something a little more stable. Now, when I'm playing this arrangement, I've got the tones there. I've got the B, the C, and the D with the G with all of the moving bass lines. Now, before we move on, the moving bass line goes from this E to the F to the G to the A. So really, we have some semblance of a C with E in the bass, some semblance of an F chord, our G chord, and what we could call A minor or A minor 7. Technically, it would be like an 11, but you don't need to know that. So when I'm playing this, I'm not just playing the tones all clustered together like you could. I'm using this more as guidelines of notes that are an option for me to play. So I'm going to use my G up here as a constant tone, but I'm going to use maybe one or two other notes, possibly three, but I'm going to use this just as options of notes that I can play. And my hand is staying right here. Now I have written out here the actual transcription of what I played in the video, so you can look at that and play. But every time I play this, I do it a little bit differently because I've got these notes just as my guidelines. I can play a couple together. Probably going to get too rhythmic on the intro and want to set up. Now this last chord, you'll notice on the video, I play this really open chord. It's just a C open chord with the C and the G with the C in the bass. So that just kind of helps to set up the tonal center of where we are. We're in the key of C. Letter B is called chord substitutions and parallel six. So I'm using two things simultaneously, so I'll explain both of these. So chord substitution, again, like tone clusters, the name implies that it is a substitution of a chord. So it's like a substitute teacher. You have your regular teacher, but then you get your substitute teacher that's teaching the same math class. You have substitute chords, so you have one chord that you're replacing with another chord. So instead of my one chord, in this case C, I'm going to use my sixth chord, A minor. Now the sixth chord is a very common substitution. Instead of playing the one chord, if you're looking for a different chord, the sixth chord is a very viable option. It's probably one of the most common. The reason for that is because of the common chord tones that it has. So if you look at your C chord, I have C, E, and G. If you look at the A minor chord, I still have C and E in the chord. I've just raised that G up to the A. So I have at least 2 common chord tones in that, but if I play an A minor 7, it's almost like I'm playing a C chord up here with A in the bass. So I actually have 3 chord tones in common. So the 6th chord is a very viable option to substitute for the 1. And I use that in Teach me some melodious sonnet. So I could have gone to the 1, teach me some melodious sonnet, which I do later. But to set up the arrangement, I use this 6th chord, some melodious sonnet, and I go to that 4 chord. So the next thing is the parallel 6th. Now parallel 6, if you can watch my hand, it's like a mannequin hand. I've got a fixed interval between all of my notes. Now that's going to vary depending on what key you're in, but we're in C, so it's just all the white notes with this little mannequin hand. So you can almost kind of think of it like a soprano line and an alto line moving together. Some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. So I'm using that parallel harmony. So they have found that 6th and 3rds work really well in parallel. If I use other intervals like a 4th, it has a distinct sound. I might not want to use this in the arrangement. Parallel 5ths, that also has kind of a distinct sound. As you get farther into like 7ths, more dissonant, even 2nds. But the 6ths and the 3rds have a really nice sound. They have a nice spread and they have a nice sound when you use those in parallel motion. So in letter C, we use this flatted 7. Now you don't need to know the terminology of that, even though you probably have heard this in music. But think of the flatted 7 as basically a whole step below your 1 chord. So if you're in the key of C, your 1 chord is C, you're just going down a whole step to B flat. So whatever key you're playing in, just go down a whole step from your normal key. So like I said, you probably have heard this in music. There's that flatted 7, that B flat chord. So I use this in the arrangement. I don't use a typical B flat chord. I use a different voicing for that. So I'm using more of an open sound with the C, F, and the C. I kind of like that sound. I just kind of was experimenting and found that that was the chord that I liked. So I throw that in at the teach me some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. So it adds a nice little kind of a surprise there. It's not a weird chord like we've never heard it, but it just adds a nice little surprise to that section. So letter D is the 1-2 movement. Now I've talked extensively about this in other videos. In fact, I have a full video dedicated just to the 1-2 movement. If you haven't seen it, I'll put a link right up here so you can check that one out. Typically what we use the 1-2 movement for is to add some movement to a stagnant chord. So if we're in a key of C, if we're hanging on that C, my chord might just be C. But to add some movement, we're going to toggle back and forth between that 1 and the 2. C is the 1, D minor is the 2. We're still keeping C in the bass, but we're using that 1-2 movement to add some movement. But another way that we can use it is to actually follow the melody. Now, Come Thou Fount is a great example of a melody that will follow the 1-2 movement. So instead of just playing like this, hitherto thy love has blessed me, we're going to use that 1-2 movement to follow. Hitherto thy love has blessed me. Okay, so there's our 1-2 movement for the arrangement. Now, letter E is one of my favorite modulation techniques. Now, you may not fully grasp this, but this may be one that you say, I don't get it, not going to use it, and that's okay. But if you can get the concept of this, this is a really good modulation technique. So here we have bought me with his precious blood. Now I'm using a substitution chord here. I'm not playing the 1 chord. I'm using a substitution. I'm using that 6 chord instead of the 1. Bought me with his precious blood. Now from that 6 chord, I'm moving up to the 5 chord with 3 in the bass. Now I could go up to the 1 like I did earlier in the arrangement, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to climb up to the major 6 chord. So bought me with his precious blood. Now I have an A major chord with C sharp in the bass. That A actually becomes the 5 of the chord that I'm going to, which is D. Now I've set myself up to be in a new key signature. So here again, I'm in A minor. Bought me with his precious blood. Now I'm in my new key of D major. When we have a tag, sometimes it's just a repeat of a section like the last section that we do, and we could just play it like we normally did. But in this arrangement, what I did is I went to that chord substitution of that B minor, and I also did an a cappella. So we're in the key of D now. Seal it for thy courts above, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. So now it just adds a little bit more variety. Instead of just going back to that D chord and playing the same chords, I went to that chord substitution, that minor chord, and did an a cappella section. So it just adds a little more variety to our arrangement. So in letter G, we're using the Deceptive cadence, which I explained a little bit more in detail in the PDF. That's basically your chord substitution. Here, it's your 6th chord. But to get there, I'm using what's called a secondary dominant. So I'm just going to try to briefly explain what that is. You can do more research on this on your own. But a secondary dominant is an altered chord that acts like the 5 of the chord that you're going to. The chord we're going to is B minor. So let's temporarily put ourselves in the world of B minor. We have our 1 chord, 4 chord, 5, and back to the 1. So that 5 chord is an F sharp. It's a major chord. I could even add that 7 in there. So what I'm doing is I'm using that chord to pull me strongly back or to that B minor chord. So I have all thy chords above. I could use that A chord. Seal it for thy chords above. But listen how strong that pull is when I use that secondary dominant. Seal it for thy chords above. So it just has that stronger classical pull to that B minor chord. Well, thanks again for watching, and if you're a beginner or intermediate, thanks for hanging in there. I know there's a lot of intense stuff that we were talking about in this video, but again, try not to get bogged down with all of the stuff and all of the terminology. If you can, maybe take 1 or 2 concepts from this video. Maybe go back and watch again. You can actually look at the chapters below to skip ahead if there was parallel 6 or the modulation that you wanted to watch again. And before you sign off, make sure to check out some of these other videos. I've included the original arrangement that I did of Come Thou Fount here, so you can check that out, or one of the other videos. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.